to say, I went through a series of sort of mental health, physical type of problems, came out the other side and said, well, how have I messed this up so much? And what I realized was that the time I was spent practicing was very separate to the time I was spent working. And I had to integrate the two. And one of the problems that we get, and I'm probably going to speak way out of turn here, so please let me know if I am. One of the problems that we have in any of these systems is thinking that you have discovered the one and only truth. You haven't discovered the one and only truth. You've discovered the framework and the words that work for you, and they point towards the one and only truth. This understanding that we have through Zhineng Qigong isn't exclusive. What we have is a framework that works for us, that helps us to access it in a way that makes sense to us as individuals. But these understandings are always there. And if you look at the great stories that have sort of cropped up throughout history and are being retold in different formats, they're always pointing towards something beyond. There's always, the reason they keep coming back is there's this truth that sits within them. I'd like to share an idea, and it's an idea that I used when I was presenting at a conference recently. And I was presenting to a group of people who had no experience of Qigong. And it's that question about how do you explain Qigong to somebody who has never practiced Qigong? So the standard way, I mean, I too often find myself having to compare it to Tai Chi. And to me, it's an uncomfortable comparison and I don't want to go there. But the model that I tend to use is, this is my house and I've been living in it for however many years, well over 50 now. But I'm a hoarder. And I collect stuff and I hold on to stuff. What Qigong is, it's a way of helping me to declutter my house. It's a way of helping me to actually unpack the stuff that I've been holding on to for way too tightly for way too long. And the way that we do it, it can be as simple as just a Tai Chi practice where we release and gather. But when we do just simply release and gather, this is a bit like if I go into my home, the first room that you walk into is effectively the kitchen. So if I practice this, the chances are it's a bit like me going into the kitchen and going, you know what, I'm going to make sure the surfaces are wiped down, the floor's clean, and it looks respectable. Look how beautiful my kitchen is. Sometimes you'll invite people beyond the kitchen. So you may want to do a little bit of work in the dining room or the lounge. And so therefore, look how nice my lounge is. But it's not that often that we go, look what I've got up in the loft. Look what's down in the cellar. You know, what Qigong does is it gives you the ability to do housework throughout the whole of your home. It gives you the ability to actually find out what you've got stored away in all of the places in the body. And it's not about getting rid of stuff. It's about picking it up, looking at it and going, is this useful to me? And if the answer is yes, then keep it. And if the answer is no, then it's so easy to let it go, but you need to ask that question. If you simply go, I don't need this anymore and pack it away in a box somewhere, it's still in a box somewhere. You need to be able to look at it and go, do I need this? That's the gift that I think exists within Qigong. So when we practice Tai Chi or any of the smaller movements, I'd like to ask a question of anybody who's looking, or watching. When you practice Tai Chi, are you practicing in your kitchen or are you practicing in your whole house? I think a really big thing for me is it's not the practicing of Qigong, it's the application of Qigong. I spent years trying to get good at practicing Qigong. And it meant that I could wave my arms and legs around in the right sequence. It meant that I could have a wonderful state when I was in practice. But I hadn't figured out how to actually transfer that into everyday life. And I think I think one of the real skills that we don't really talk about that much is that transference of the skills that we gain within the practice of Qigong into everyday life. So how it can help us in challenging situations, how it can help us in just day-to-day things, how it can help us to communicate more clearly, to listen more thoroughly. And these are all sitting there within the practice, and yet we don't necessarily take that much notice of them. And it isn't to take away from the effect of the practice. I think the practice is an astonishing thing, and it's a really powerful thing. But what the practice does is it gives you clues, it gives you techniques, it gives you ways that you can actually apply apply Qigong into everyday life. And those are the bits that I get really excited about. Those are the bits that I think really make a difference. Well, to start with, it gave me a false idea of what I was capable of, and I broke spectacularly. So it really failed to start with. I mean, I speak about this a lot, but I was written off work with work-related stress in 2010. And what I was doing was I was taking my practice time, I'd classify it as my eyes closed practice. And I was practicing for 2 hours a day so that I could cope with an 8-hour working day that was very difficult and very stressful. I wasn't a Qigong teacher at that point. What then happened was that I went through a series of sort of mental health, physical type of problems, came out the other side and said, well, how have I messed this up so much? And what I realized was that the time I was spent practicing was very separate to the time I was spent working. And I had to integrate the two. And so once I then started integrating the two, I found that things just became easier. There was a conversation, and sort of an extreme version of this. There was a conversation I had with somebody, a guy who runs an organization in the UK called the College of Medicine. So he was the main medical advisor to the British government a number of years ago. And we're sitting in his club in Whitehall, which is if you go to clubs in Whitehall in London, that's a very sort of, and the thing is that to me, as a Qigong practitioner, this is exactly the same as any other conversation you have with anybody. He's just somebody who you're interacting with. But before I practiced Qigong, I'd be sitting there going, oh, it's Whitehall, it's Michael Dixon, and there's all of this sort of amazing stuff around and all these astonishing views. No, we're just two people sitting together having a conversation. And I think that that's the narrative that we can have around how important certain things are and how influential certain people are. I think that that gets shaken by the Qigong practice. So you can just have a genuine conversation with somebody and you can connect to people, and I say you can listen to people. And so able to understand where everybody, or able to understand more easily where people are coming from, means that you're more able to learn, you're more able to interact. And so those types of things come up a lot from applying Qigong. And there's so many more examples. I think probably the most extreme was when I was training in Saudi Arabia, and as I arrived in the airport, it was a military airport. One of my training aids was juggling balls. And juggling balls, when they put them through a scanner, look a little bit like bombs. And of course, as you're in a military airport, they sort of miss out the niceties and they immediately start drawing guns at you. And there you are, it was sort of about 1 o'clock in the morning. I've been traveling for about 9 hours, I think, at that point. And my first reaction to being in that situation was to breathe into the kidneys. Was to just take a breath, take a moment, because there was no point in panicking. And again, it's all stuff that we learn through Qigong. We condition ourselves to respond in different ways. And yeah, these are the types of things that I think are out there for the for the taking through Qigong practice. And again, not the normal stuff you hear about, not the healing process, but the application of it. I think that's the place to go. I'm really fascinated by the concept of humility. I think that being humble is something that I've got an awful lot to learn about with this. I'm part of a group called which is related to something called the Harmony Project. And the Harmony Project is something that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, has started in the UK. And so, as with anything like this, you weirdly get politics in everything, and people going, no, I'm right, they're wrong. And it's just like, it's pathetic, some of the stuff that happens. But I was asked by one of the universities that I work with about who is best to work with on this one. And my response was, ignore what people are saying, look at what they're doing. And if you sit down and you spend time with certain groups, you'll find that their actions speak of harmony. And the action that I was particularly referring to is working with some very highly respected doctors of conventional medicine who are absolutely at the peak of their practice, at the peak of their influence, but they listen to you. And there's something about humility in that I think is amazing, that these people who have got such an astonishing amount of understanding and such an astonishing amount of influence can actually take time to listen in order to understand what people are saying, instead of imposing their beliefs, their ideas, their framework and everything on you. I think when you look at humility in those terms, you're talking about something very, very powerful. And I think that humility, to be able to just be with people as equals and not feel as if you need to be imposing your understanding on anybody or sharing your so-called knowledge, which quite often is just noise, if I'm, in my experience. I think this is really powerful. So if you link this ability to be this type of humility with the type of respect, the internal respect that we develop within the Qigong. So when you're respectful for yourself, so when you're kind to yourself, when you don't make excuses about things not working properly, so that you just keep them going, when you actually take time to be respectful inside and then humble on the outside, you develop this ability to completely transform. And it's that transformation that's interesting. It's not and again, you meet people along the way who have a fake humility. That becomes their persona. That becomes, who they pretend to be. But there's some people who you meet who have this genuine humility. And when that's combined with this genuine respect for themselves, that genuine respect for themselves translates into respect for others. And I think this is it's a really powerful piece for me at the moment. And I'm learning it from the most unexpected places. I'd been thinking that I'd be learning it from Qigong practitioners, but I'm learning it from conventional medicine doctors. I'm learning it from and I find that, again, that to me is really interesting, because it builds my practice without having to actually be following a particular person's style. It's just the understanding that exists within the practice being applied out into everyday life so that you can continue to learn from it.
Having a better understanding of Qigong, I seem to find that everywhere, even in the movies I watch, like Star Wars, I can relate Qigong to that. And I was wondering, is it the same for you? And what do you learn from these experiences?
I think so, yeah, I do. I heard a lovely story about one of the very well-known Zhineng Qigong teachers was evidently telling all of his students to watch, I think it was Kung Fu Panda 3, but it might have been Kung Fu Panda 4. And I thought that was just beautiful, because this understanding that we have through Zhineng Qigong isn't exclusive. What we have is a framework that works for us, that helps us to access it in a way that makes sense to us as individuals. But these understandings are always there. And if you look at the great stories that have sort of cropped up throughout history and are being retold in different formats, they're always pointing towards something beyond. There's always, the reason they keep coming back is there's this truth that sits within them. And yes, I completely agree. Star Wars, I don't know much about Star Wars, but the little I know about Star Wars, it talks about something that is far more fundamental than is initially there. I think it's true of a lot of stuff. I ended up talking about Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, with somebody, and some of the way that he quotes things. And when you actually start to pull that apart as a Zhineng Qigong practitioner, you're going, oh my goodness, he knew about this stuff. These stories are always there, and it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, when look at the Lao Tzu, look at the Tao Te, look at the traditional Chinese texts, look at the Qing Qing Qing, the cultivating stillness. These stories have been within the traditions of all of our countries for millennia. It's just that sometimes we choose to ignore them. Sometimes we choose to pull them apart and analyze them and miss the point. But actually, I think the truth is there within so many of them. So yes, I not so much films, because it's not something I engage in so much. But yeah, I find it in stories, in music, in interactions. It's always there.